Hello fellow collectors, I hope you're all doing really well. Today I continue my series where I talk about the best films I watched in the preceding month. Now during November I was a bit under the weather, which included having to take some time off work. I often find that when I get sick, I can't really do anything that requires focus, and it's only when I start feeling a bit better that I'm actually able to watch some films. So it's always a good sign for me when I wake up and think, I'll put something on today as I just continue to lie down. Well, I decided to take the opportunity to watch some longer films and also get into some titles on my watch list that I was just a bit less interested in. As is usually the way, two of those titles I ended up absolutely loving and I can't wait to talk about them, but I'll leave it to you to guess which ones they might be. And so, without further ado, let's get into the best films I watched in November. First up is Conversation Piece, a film from 1974 starring Burt Lancaster, Silvana Mangiano and Helmut Berger, directed by Luciano Visconti. Now the only reason I bought this one a while back was because Eureka announced that it was going out of print. I had no clue as to what it was about or what I would be in for. But what a stellar purchase it turned out to be, because I absolutely loved this film. As someone who is really quite introverted, I found so much to relate to in Burt Lancaster's character. Essentially, it's a film about a retired professor who lives with his housekeeper and enjoys his solitude and his interests, until a loud, obnoxious, rambunctious, but fairly lovable family move in above him and pretty much destroy his calm and quiet life. It's a great and engaging story, and Lancaster in particular is brilliant, as you would expect. Visconti certainly touches on some heady themes in the film, like excess, and in particular the excess of the young and the wealthy, and I suppose the bourgeoisie really. In some ways the film shows how Lancaster's character might have been better off without engaging with them, but in others that his engagement changes them, and changes him as well. Lancaster's character is almost certainly a part of that bourgeois group, though perhaps not to the same extent as the family. But I do wonder if there is also some attempt to show that his being so very inward-looking is also a type of excess. Overall, I was just completely whisked away in this film, as it transported me in the story, and what a fantastic story it was. Also, just as a little aside, I have to say that Lancaster's character was wearing a fantastic cardigan, and I liked it so much that I decided to buy a similar one myself. And as an extra little aside, I'm currently rewatching Frasier, and I've seen both Frasier and Niles wearing similar ones in their homes, so I feel like I'm in good company. Up next, and we have a film directed by Jim Jarmusch from 1986, and it's Down by Law, starring Tom Waits, John Lurie and Roberto Benigni. Now, I was so happy when Criterion announced that they'd be releasing this in the UK, as there are quite a few Jarmusch films in the Criterion collection which we don't have access to over here, so I'm really hoping that we'll slowly get more of them. Well, I picked this one up as soon as I could, and I was not disappointed at all. This is the exact type of Jarmusch film that just speaks to me on some almost ethereal level. There is a story and a plot, but it's really the excellent characters that you get stuck into here. As with lots of Jarmusch films, it's slow without being boring, it's quiet without being empty, and almost meandering but without losing its purpose. And there's also a load of humour in this one, particularly from Benigni's character, which was an absolute delight. The story focuses on three men who eventually find themselves in the same prison cell together, as the front cover might suggest. It's in their interactions and developing relationship that this wonderful film captures something particularly special. It's hard to really articulate, but there's just some great chemistry between the three of them, and as they get to know each other, the audience is drawn into that process, and you really start to care about these characters. It's just a wonderfully directed, paced and shot film that just hit the mark on every single level for me. Then we have Van Gogh, a film from 1991 starring Jacques Dutronc, Alexandra London and Bernard Lecoq, directed by Maurice Pialat. This one is yet another of Eureka's fast-growing out-of-print list of films, and it was another that I happened across a while back on eBay. Seeing it at a good price and that it was out of print, I grabbed it, and again what a great decision that was, as it was yet another top-tier blind buy for me. As the name might suggest, it's a film about the painter Vincent van Gogh, but the film in particular focuses on him near the end of his life. Now, I know next to nothing about him, but one thing that I love about certain films is that when they are so interesting, they make you want to do some research on the topic that they're based on, and this was one of those films for me. It in no way painted, excuse the pun, Van Gogh in any sort of halo light, but just as a flawed human being, sometimes cruel, often selfish, and someone who has been beaten down by others not appreciating his work, and despite that, maintaining some sort of confidence that he was a truly great artist. It's a slow-moving and deep biopic, with some astonishing acting, particularly from Dutronc, whose portrayal of Van Gogh is utterly mesmerising. It almost feels like an epic, but on a small scale, if that makes any sense at all. When I got to the end of the film and it's 158 minutes, it had just taken me on such a rich, deep and captivating journey that it felt like I'd seen something really quite special. I'm so glad I picked this one up, as it's now started me on a journey into more of Maurice Pialat's films, and who knows when I would have discovered such an interesting director if I hadn't taken a chance on this one. Next, and we have Army of Shadows, directed by the great Jean-Pierre Melville. It's from 1969 and stars Lino Ventura, Simone Signore, Paul Meurice and Jean-Pierre Cassel, as well as a host of others. This was a truly astonishing piece of work, and despite it having a runtime of over 140 minutes, it barely felt like any time at all had passed. The story was so completely compelling. The more of Melville's films I see, the more I grow to appreciate his style, and I think this film in particular is a great example of visual storytelling at its best. There is of course plenty of dialogue, but it almost felt secondary to me, as the camera itself does so much of the work. The film is set during the midst of World War II, and it's about members of the French resistance fighting in occupied France. Interestingly, it's based off a book by Joseph Kessel, who was actually a member of the resistance, and wrote the story mixing in both fiction and fact based off his experiences. The performances here are top tier, as you might expect from such a cast, and Lino Ventura, who I guess you would say is more or less the main character, gives a masterclass of acting in this role. Every expression, movement, his demeanour and tone, it all just works so well, and he really drew me into the story. I really got a sense of realism as well, from sudden violence to others struggling to go through with things that in peacetime would be unthinkable, but in wartime perhaps necessary. The palpable tension as things are about to take place, or capture may be imminent, is expertly done. You really start to care about these people as the tapestry of this story unfolds. And it's an incredibly powerful and moving story, and I think my favourite Melville film so far. Lastly, we have The Last Metro, from 1980 and directed by Francois Truffaut. Now, I always enjoy it when randomly you end up watching what could be a double feature, or films that talk about the same issues or themes just by chance. Sort of like the way Hollywood seems to sometimes put out two films very close to each other that are basically the same, a sort of Volcano meets Dante's Peak, or White House Down meets Olympus Has Fallen. Well, coming off the back of Army of Shadows, I happened to watch The Last Metro, which is another one set during World War II, and actually during the same year as Army of Shadows, 1942. It's about a theatre that was owned by a Jewish man and his wife, played by Catherine Deneuve, before the war, and they are both trying to survive and keep the theatre open and put on a play during this most dire of times under the occupying force. For me, I think Catherine Deneuve is one of those rare calibre of actors that whatever they are doing on screen, they are simply magnetic. It's such a rare quality that I guess must be something you just simply can't teach. And for me, it's actors like Humphrey Bogart, Audrey Hepburn, Catherine Deneuve and Brad Pitt, to name just a few, that have this sort of on-screen magnetism where they just seem to captivate the camera. Well, here, each time Deneuve is on screen, you just can't look away. Her performance is just fantastic, as I suppose you would expect it to be, but it never ceases to amaze me how utterly brilliant she is. Alongside Gerard Depardieu, who is absolutely excellent here as well, they make a great duo with great chemistry. Truffaut crafts such an engaging, thoughtful, and I think important film here. He seems to be making a point of saying how that even during these dire, dark times, people still went to the theatre and to the cinema. That art, entertainment and story are such an important and valuable part of our lives, and particularly French life. You keep hope alive through these moments of artistry continuing undisrupted. It's almost a British keep calm and carry on, but for the French and in their theatre going. It was a captivating story that had some really powerful and heart-in-your-throat moments of tension, and yet had plenty of Truffaut's more jovial style woven throughout the narrative, so that it never really feels too harsh or too heavy, which is something I find so wonderful about his films. And then lastly, onto a couple of honourable mentions from me. The first up is Emily the Criminal, which features a stellar performance from Aubrey Plaza, who I love to see in more serious roles. And lastly, The Last Detail, which was a real experience with some great performances. And that's a lot from me and my November in film. I hope you had a wonderful month as well, and I hope your December is also going excellently. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.